Welcome back to Inside the Pastor's Study Podcast. My name is Pastor Jeremy, and
I'm Pastor George.
Sometimes you're in the same room and you still step on each other. That's all right. Yeah. Well, we are a father-son duo pastoring out of a local church in Methuen, Massachusetts, named Marsh Corner Community Church. And our podcast here is designed to bring you inside the walls of the pastor's study to talk about the things that pastors chat about throughout the week. What's the pastor thinking Monday through Saturday, and what goes on there? What are some of those conversations like? And if you've ever wanted to be a fly on the wall in the pastor study, this is kind of what this is your opportunity for that. And sometimes being a fly on the wall in our study means you're just, bored to tears as we read stuff and research things, but other times, we have some conversations that, we don't really have a great avenue for having with the congregation, but we feel it could still be helpful for people. So that's kind of what this podcast is about, those helpful conversations that don't have another spot that really works for them. So we're back. I had last week we managed to release the podcast on time, but we recorded it a little early because I was in upstate New York exercising for a really long time.
Absolutely crazy. 140 miles plus?
140.6. You don't want to leave out the 0.6. That's important.
Yeah. You were competing in your first Ironman triathlon?
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
It is. It's been kind of a long journey. So through my 20s, fitness was not a priority. We'll say that. I think, we were talking last week about young pastors and things they should know, and maybe this is something to add to that conversation. Church work is hard, and the demands and the time that church work requires of a young pastor. It's something that I don't know that everyone comes ready and prepared for. Yeah. It's a job that has very strange hours. I know I have a friend who works in a very large church as a pastor, and while he has some of these pastor hours too, because of the size of the church and his specific job category, he's kind of normal office hours, and he's home and and out. But when you're in one of these garden-sized churches, to use that continue to use that analogy, the pastor's schedule is strange.
Right, because you never know when, using that analogy, you never know when something's ready for harvest, and you've got to get it off. You've got to go out and pick everything clean. And, frost is coming, so let's get that taken care of.
So I had a mentor tell me a long time ago. I remember asking him as I was preparing to serve in my first church, like, what does an average week look like? And he said there isn't one. No. But that you have some weeks where you work 20 hours and you have other weeks where you work 80, and you just, sometimes it's hard to plan for all of that. And so through my 20s, I found myself much more in the 80 side, especially in working, quote unquote part-time at ministries, which require full-time effort for part-time pay.
So do you remember this? We were at dinner one night with our whole family, and I have a son. Jeremy has a brother who is in the United States Army Reserve, and for a little while he was activated, and he was activated here in the U.S., which was pretty fun. It was actually not too very far from home. But one Sunday we were eating dinner together, and he was complaining about how his work week was like 60 hours long. And Jeremy and I were both in pastoral ministry at the time, and we just looked at one another and we laughed, because that's life for us in some ways. I mean, there's the times when you're in the 20-hour-a-week thing, and
there are easy weeks.
There are, yeah. But they're usually followed by weeks that are just off the chart.
Insanely difficult and time-consuming, for sure. Because I think we're largely in people work, and when you're around people, you have to be subject to their schedules.
Yeah.
And
their lack of.
Or their lack of schedule. Yeah.
How many parties did you do this weekend?
Oh, man, I forget. At least 3. Yeah, bouncing around to different birthday parties.
Yeah,
exactly. So I think through my 20s, there was this time where I was learning how to manage all of that, and how to manage my time well, and to manage my health well. And the health kind of fell by the wayside. And so I think when Kim and I moved here 8 years ago. Is it 8 years ago now? I weighed close to 300 pounds at that point. And
But be truthful, you always did. I mean, so
Yeah.
Jeremy's not leaving everything on the table here, right? Because through high school, Jeremy was a defensive tackle for his football team in high school.
defensive end. Yeah.
Defensive end, yeah.
Making
And
lots of tackles.
yes, yes, and he was a well stacked boy. He was very, some people might say he was big boned. I don't know. He was large. He was
Yeah.
always up at that end
built,
of the
I was built
of the
well for what I
spectrum.
was doing. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
And so managing my health and my weight's always been kind of a challenge. And so I hit, I hit a point while living here where I decided, like, hey, I kind of want to be around long enough to have a long and fruitful ministry, and also, be around better, be more engaged with my family and all of those things. And so I started going back to the gym, which I had stopped doing after football, and went through that process. Spent a year losing quite a bit of weight, and I had somebody in my congregation challenge me to join them for a sprint triathlon. This is about 5 years ago now. And I looked up what that was because I liked mountain biking. And in the summers in college, I had done some lifeguarding and on the ocean and pools. And so I enjoyed swimming as well. But then I saw that race involved a 5K run. And I hadn't run at all since, picking it up as a bit of a hobby in college. And I'd had some knee trouble thanks to football. And so I laughed at them and said, I don't run. No, thank you. And they kept hounding me. And so with about 4 weeks to go before this race, I decided to go out to a local rail trail. I mapped out 3.1 miles. And I decided, like, if I can survive this run, then I'll sign up for this race. And then, at least I'll experience it and give it a try. And after I finished the run, I thought, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I'll go ahead and sign up. And I downloaded a quick training plan, started exercising for it. And in the process of preparing just for that first race, decided that I actually really liked all of these sports together. This seemed like a neat challenge. And so before I even did the first race, I had signed up for another one after that. And my favorite part of this early story is that the woman in my church who had goaded me into participating in this race, broke her ankle like a week before the race, which isn't, a favorite part. That was just awful. But she's never actually done a triathlon since.
No kidding.
Yeah, she's never done one. But it was enough to get the ball rolling for me. And so I did those two that summer. And I've continued in this process of, seeing what else I'm capable of. And so it's been a lot of fun. A couple of years ago, I did something called the Dopey Challenge in Disney, which is a running event where on a Thursday you run a 5K, Friday you run a 10K, Saturday you run a half marathon, and then Sunday you finish with the full marathon. And and I've done a few half Ironmans leading up to this year, where those are a 1.2 mile swim followed by a 56 mile bike followed by a half marathon. And I've done several of those. And this goal started like growing. And I thought, like, maybe someday I'll do one of these full Ironmans. And I was actually looking at my Facebook memories last week, and we had gone to a family wedding in Lake Placid 5 years ago.
Yeah,
And
beautiful.
I had a picture on the Olympic Oval, and I had a post about maybe someday I'll be back here and do an Ironman. So that was 5 years ago, and I was just starting to discover this triathlon thing. And so fast forward to this year, I decided to sign up for one and train for one, and last weekend completed my first full Ironman. So it was quite the event.
So, what are the events in an Ironman? Just remind me.
So it's double the half, right? So you do a 2.4 mile swim, and then you change out of your swim gear, get on your bike, and you ride for 112 miles. And it was in the Adirondacks, so it's mostly up and down, not much flat. And then after that, you throw your running shoes on and you run a marathon. And I managed To finish, I did not do as well as I'd hoped going into that. I'd actually been training for a race that was supposed to happen at the end of August, and they canceled that because it's Canada. And so I lost about a month of training, but I was just there to experience and finish, and managed to do that with an hour to spare. But yeah, it was quite a powerful event. I was reflecting back on my athletic life in the process of trying to survive the marathon. And I was thinking about how, I'm in this stunning place that, looking at incredible beauty that God has designed, and, marveling at that, and then starting to think about like the human body a bit. And on the one hand, one of the things that struck me was this amazing balance. Because on the one hand, humans are very fragile beings. It's strange that we're at the top of the food chain somehow. Yet everything else on the top of the food chain would chomp us.
Yeah, that's true.
But like we're very fragile. And my football career ended because of an awkward play where my knee got taken out by somebody on my own team, and that was just an instant. And my knee folded over their shoulder pads, and that was it. And easily injured. We're so easily injured. And even part of the fear for a lot of athletes training for long races like this isn't necessarily the race. It's getting injured in the process of training for it, because it's, you just use your body too much in the wrong way, and you create problems. And so we're very, very fragile. But at the same time, like just exceptionally durable. Like how is it that, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'2". I weigh I hover around 235 to 250 pounds. I'm not like a wispy,
not a runner's body.
I am not a wispy runner. No, not at all. And so, it's just a marvel that like God has created us in such a way that we can train and commit to something and do just some really powerful and amazing things that are mind-boggling. And so that was one of the things I was really struck by this weekend, that God would make us in such a way that we're capable of doing so many amazing things physically. So a lot of people have asked me in my congregation what's next, and I have no idea. I'm not gonna, these things are expensive. They're hard to afford, and I'm a pastor. So that's, I'm not gonna do an Ironman next year at least, but it's one of those things I would like to try again and see if I can improve on, because the other piece of this is there's so much to learn. And this is another, I don't know if this is just universal to pastors, but it's at least the two of us. There's something about figuring things out and puzzles and there's just understanding processes and understanding like things that are hard to grasp that really just drives me even more than just like the exercise pieces. What really continues to capture my attention in this triathlon thing is how you get all of these disciplines to work together, and how do you like optimize all of the elements around like how do you eat, when do you eat, and how do you exercise? When do you exercise? And how do you fit all of that in when you're also, you have responsibilities to your church, and more importantly, you have responsibilities to your family. Those are all things that, and they're just a real challenge that I really enjoy. I enjoy that like logistical challenge of figuring all that out.
Right. For me, all of life is a search for illustration and analogy. Mm-hmm. And, it just pet peeve, just going to sidetrack for just a second.
That's great. That's part of the fun.
I love it when just am amazed when I come up with an analogy, trying to take a life experience and make a biblical principle out of it, or trying to take a life experience and make a concept more clear, and the person that I'm giving that analogy to totally misses the analogy. Like, well, what does that have to do with God's word? And it just amazes me that they miss these things. They miss seeing God make things real in
our common experiences.
In our common experiences.
It's this common grace, right?
Yes.
It's the revealing of God's nature in His creation.
Yeah.
We have, this is like theology 101. Like God reveals himself through his word, but he also reveals himself through his creation.
Absolutely. So,
and we should be students of both.
Yeah. So, I mean, I live my life walking down the street and I'm looking at things and saying, oh, that's an illustration.
Yeah.
I can use that. I can take that. Good. I mean, Jesus did that, right? And of course, Jesus had the same experience. Jesus taught in parables.
Yeah.
Which was to take an earthly concept and illustrate a heavenly reality from it. And people would listen to Jesus' parables, and even his disciples would say, great story, Jesus. What did that mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot to that. There are just some people who don't think in analogy. They don't think in, there's that whole section in the SATs about, if this means this, then this means that,
Yeah.
And
that was the section of the SATs I got a perfect score on.
Yeah.
Because that's just how, I think it's how my brain works.
Right.
I love that stuff.
Right. So all of life is an analogy. All of life is an illustration. And so we live our lives doing that. So I'm sure that there are illustrations and analogies that you've come up with.
Oh yeah, I'll be milking this for years.
Yes.
I should probably find a way of claiming the race entry fee on my taxes.
True.
So that, because it's research.
Yeah, research.
Yeah.
Research, yeah. Yeah.
This actually, we were talking before we went on the air about our plan for the episode this morning, but there's actually hit something else that we didn't talk about in advance.
Oh, I love it.
That I think is a helpful word for young pastors as we continue this conversation. So here's the thing. One of the big challenges that young pastors, and I say young, but some pastors never figure this out.
Yeah.
One of the challenges that young pastors struggle with is how to balance the requirements that your church has of you with your biblical duty to nurture and care for your family.
Yes. Yeah.
And I have sat at several conferences over the years listening to pastors from churches that I respect, whose books I've read, and these guys that I look up to as good thinkers and great speakers. And one of the things that I've observed as a common bond behind a lot of these quote unquote successful megachurch pastors is they will say, I worked too hard in my early days and I neglected my family. And I was an addict to work, or I was a workaholic, and I wish that I hadn't done that. And I look at stuff like that, and I always, I would hear them say that, and I'd be like, yeah, but without that, you probably wouldn't be standing on this platform with the luxury of being able to look back and say, you worked too hard. Like all of your effort probably has paid off with the fruitful ministry that you have. But I do think that young pastors really struggle with how do I balance out my obligations to both of these places.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I was in that circumstance too, very, very early in my ministry, and I have to thank and I have to cite an individual, a guy named Bill Commons. He was an ABWE missionary. ABWE, Association of Baptists for World Evangelism. I think they're in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania nowadays. But Bill had been a missionary in Hong Kong. Okay. Yeah, he'd been a missionary in Hong Kong with ABWE. He had risen to a point where he was kind of a development / field director / trying to find new missionaries. Had a good conversation with him, and just one day, I was a young associate pastor. We had there were two of you, Jeremy and Josh were born, and we're trying to manage that. And I was trying to do youth work, and I was trying to preach, and I was trying to do lots of other stuff. And Bill said to me, here's how my life was in Hong Kong. He said, Hong Kong is a very workaholic, structured culture. He said, everybody in Hong Kong overworks. And he said when he was in Hong Kong, the thing that he learned was to do something called block scheduling. And brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And he said what you needed was you needed blocks of time that you identified for work, blocks of time that you identified for personal play, and blocks of time that you gave for family time. And he said those blocks needed to be part of your everyday schedule. He said in Hong Kong, because he knew that the culture was such that you had to have a schedule for everything. He said he would put his blocks. He would identify his block schedule and put it on his office door so that people would come by and they would see that maybe they came by at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and he was out playing tennis. But it was a personal block time, and they would say, well, why are you taking personal time during the workday? And he said, because my schedule is such, my life is such that my time doesn't overlap with what everybody else thinks of as a normal workday, right?
Yeah.
And you think about that, there are loads of people who are in that kind of an idea. I mean, if you're a retailer and you're only open 9 to 5, you're not going to get anybody in your doors because everybody is working. So how are they going to? So you're going to have Saturday hours. You're going to have evening hours. You're going to have to be open mornings before people go to work. That's how you actually survive in a retail operation. So, growing up, I worked in a retail store with a man, just a small store, and he didn't work Wednesday afternoons. So that was his Saturday. So, but pastors have to do that too. We have to consciously block out our schedule.
Yeah. I remember hearing similar advice from one of these youth pastor talking heads that you feel like you know them because you pay attention about early on. Like actually, one of the first podcasts I ever heard of and listened to was from Doug Fields, who was at the time the head of youth ministry at Saddleback Church. And Doug would talk about breaking your days up into 3 blocks, and working 2 of them. That was kind of his advice, And so you have like these morning, afternoon, evening blocks, and only work 2 of those, and make sure a third of the day was set aside for other things. And so that's kind of the process that I've had since developing that. And and as a pastor, like, it's hard to just have normal office hours. It depends on maybe your role within your church.
Right.
And I think like it's a little, because of what our roles here are different, obviously, or else we wouldn't both be here. But your role allows for probably a more regular schedule. And my role, I have a lot of time in meetings and hanging out with people and all of that. And so that usually leads to my afternoons being more free than average, because I'm in the office early in the morning, and then working early in the morning at the house, then in the office for some things, and then afternoons I tend to be off, and then evenings I'm frequently back at a different ministry or in a meeting with someone.
Right.
And
if you're a young pastor, that's a perfect schedule.
Yeah.
Because your kids are probably in baseball or football or horseback riding or something like that, and they're in that afternoon block between 3 and 5 o'clock. Well, you can schedule your time as a dad to be at all of their events.
Yep.
And there's a twofer there. Okay? There's a twofer there because and here's the twofer that I learned, and that is that if you, as the dad of a participant in a sporting event or, I don't know, I suppose ballet, if you're at all of those practices, what you're going to do is you're going to run into the other parents who are also there. I had a fantastic experience when one of my sons, one of you guys was playing Little League baseball, and I would make it to the practices. I would make it to games, and at one of those games, I had a man come up to me, and he's regular in the stands, and he said, "Hey, Pastor George, I have a question for you because there's this thing going on in my church." And we had a good, long conversation about how he should handle the situation that he was trying to understand and deal with in his local church. And it was a great development of friendship, and others heard that conversation. And pretty soon, I mean, there was a cluster of parents that would sit around me at baseball games, and I would try to watch you guys play baseball, but at the same time,
You'd be like Lucy in the Peanuts episodes with the
yeah,
pastor is in, shingle out.
yeah, exactly. And that's awesome. I mean, yeah, you're working, but you're familying, and you're.
And I think it's so like one of the challenges in pastoral ministry. This is like a rabbit trail that we don't have to go down. But one of the challenges in pastoral ministry, you're not around a lot of non-believers unless you actually focus on being around non-believers.
Yeah, absolutely.
You actually have to find them intentionally and go get them.
Yeah, it's
because
work.
Otherwise, you'll just be around your flock all the time, which is your calling. But you also have this like responsibility as a believer to be engaged in the world around you. So yeah. So finding those things, those outlets, and those avenues are really helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So finding time for your physical fitness. Now, I'm not that guy.
Yeah, it's hard.
For me, it's actually finding time for leisure reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I think this is the thing. Like, you're not all wired to do. Clearly not all wired to do Ironman. Like, I'm not even sure I'm wired for that. I just, I'm wired to try and like push my boundaries. But we are all wired to find recreation or recreation in different ways. And you need that for your own personal, physical, and mental health. And man, pastors, we could run around with mental health conversations too, but, I think it's just so key to find areas where you can find recreation and you can recharge and renew. And I think a lot of what I've noticed about myself, and this probably applies to a lot of you out there in ministry. So much of our work is mental, and so much of our work is interpersonal. And so, what helps me in my downtime is finding things to work on that are tangible. Using my hands to build something or to sweat over, those kind of help me just balance out in life. And though by doing that, it makes me, I think, a better pastor, and it makes me a better husband and father. Kim will often, like, if I've gone too long without working out, she'll notice. And she'll push me out the door to go do something because like my mood has changed, and it just kind of helps sort things back into homeostasis when I can go for a quick run or something, and that helps sort me out a bit. And it's important to find those things. And again, it's important to find all those things in, I think, their proper balance.
Right.
What I've observed as I've grown to know pastors over the years is we are excellent at devoting our time to our ministry. We're called by God to be in those places. It drives us. We have a passion for it, and sometimes just the tyranny of the urgent overwhelms us.
Yeah,
and so we're really good at devoting time to our ministries. We're pretty good at devoting our time to our hobbies, because those are like self-interesting things, and we can get lost in those areas. And this, especially as guys, the stereotype of the dad over the engine in the garage all day, or over the woodworking, tools, that's a real thing. We can get lost there and hide there and retreat there. But that third piece of committing to being a good husband and a good father is so very important that it becomes a qualification in Scripture for being a good elder.
Right.
It's one of those litmus tests to show that you are keeping, I think the reason that's there, the husband of one wife whose kids aren't a mess, like that whole thing, that's there, that serves as a litmus test to see if the elder or pastor is the kind of individual who can hold their life in its proper balance and keep things in their proper place.
Right, right.
And when you can commit to loving your spouse and loving your children, if God has blessed you with them, it's going to make you a better pastor, because the people that you rely on most are cared for and nourished. But it's also going to make you a better pastor, because now that support system exists and you are going to be able to more fully invest in the ministry that God's called you to.
Right, right, right. If you can't make it at home, then you probably don't really necessarily, and it's hard, but if you can't make it at home, you might be a great Bible student.
Yeah, a good Bible teacher,
good Bible teacher, but you don't belong in ministry.
Yeah. It's a hard word.
It is.
And I think there are a lot of people who figure this out over time, and it's too late.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, there's a lot of pressure, social pressure, emotional pressure on guys who have accepted a call. And what if they accept this call and they realize that they just aren't the family man that they should be? Or maybe, the other issue here, I'm not saying that they divorce their wives and they get, and they push their kids out of the house. But I think that one of the things that maybe needs to happen is they need to step back and say, okay, I'm going to go back into the work world, the normal 9-to-5ers, and I'm going to try and build my family back up again. I need to learn how to talk to my wife, and I need to, not just on a spiritual level, man. I mean, you can run your sermon past your wife every week if you want to. That's not the intimate conversation that your wife needs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. She needs to know. She needs to really know what makes you tick. She needs to know your aspirations and your desires and the things that you really, really, really love. And a lot of guys live their lives as isolated monastics in a household where, your wife teaches a Bible study, but she has no idea what you do, no idea what makes you tick. And that's pulling your own support out, but it's also demonstrating you're a poor manager.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So young pastors or old pastors, you're listening to this, let this be a bit of an encouragement and a challenge that you need to spend some time investing in your family.
Yeah.
And the best way to find out if you're doing well at this is to actually ask your spouse. Find a way to get the kids off to the grandparents, or to find a good teenager in the youth group and get pay for some babysitting, and just spend some time. Hey, how am I doing? Where do I have blind spots that I'm missing here? Do you feel this is a powerful question? Do you feel like the church always wins?
Interesting question. Good diagnostic.
Yeah. When there is a conflict between church time and family time, do you feel like the church always wins?
Yeah.
And see where she's at. Give that some time, and walk into that as open. It's hard to be. We tend to be defensive. Sometimes that response comes. You're like, yeah, but you don't understand. This was such a hard moment, and I had to be there. And yeah, we do. They understand. But have these conversations on a regular basis. Sit back and say, hey, how are we doing? Because you need to be able to invest in that space. And if you can invest well in your home, then I think God rewards that.
Yeah, there are some pre-diagnostics to build into that too. I mean, there are almost some rules that you set as a household. How many nights a week, for example, are you sit down with your wife and say, okay, now I am going to have to be out nights.
Yeah, part of the job.
Weekends, parts of the job. How many nights out for church work do you see me doing? And you've got, out of 7, quite honestly, it's probably going to be somewhere around 4.
Yep.
All right. That's the normal. I think that's the normal agreed upon number. 4 is pretty good. So, you can set up some diagnostics right off the bat, and you can just set some, I'll call them rules to work with. So if you've got a week that's going to overrun the 4,
Yeah, because you have some coming up that don't.
they happen, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're going to be in, the 5, 6 range, never 7. But if you're going to be in that 5, 6 range, you're violating a rule. So you're going to have to make sure that there's permission there from your wife. And, so that's the other thing.
And I think also your kids, when they're at a point,
Yeah.
when they're at the point when they know what's going on, engaging your kids in the permission process is key too. Like this is when I think, like, I remember walking out of the house for a meeting a couple of years ago, and my little girl was like, "Daddy's out again," and it's just, and that kind of hurts as you're walking out the door, and so engaging them in that process also, so they know why. Like that's a conversation we often have at dinner. I'm going out because, or this meeting is about. And so they kind of know and they're aware of the process and what's going on in my life. But sometimes those conversations and those permission questions involve them too.
Right. So there were times when I was a young pastor when I would, and you remember these, I'm sure, I would run out for a 6 o'clock meeting. We would eat dinner at 5. I would run out for a 6 o'clock meeting, get back between 7:30 and 8 o'clock to pray with all of you guys and put you to bed, read you a book. And then after you guys were asleep at like 8:30, 9 o'clock, I would zip back out to another meeting. But I was there for you to put you to bed. That was something that I knew was significant. So another thing that you need to do diagnostic-wise is, what are the important moments in my wife's life and in my children's life that I cannot miss, and how do I restructure my schedule to make those things happen?
Yeah. Great advice. That's really good.
Yeah.
So
let me just put this in here,
Yeah.
okay? Because this is part of that. You're a young pastor. You're building your schedule for the month, or you're building your schedule for the year, right? The first things you put in the calendar are not your church events. The first things you put in your calendar are your family events. So, you go through and you make sure every single one of the birthdays, every time you sit down with your wife, if you're going to celebrate the children's birthday on a Saturday so that everybody can be there, mark those calendar days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have... one birthday of yours, it was, so your birthday's in February, and it was, we were in a small church in Western New York, and all of your friends are sitting around the table, and there's probably 16 inches of snow on the ground that had just accumulated, and it's snowing again, and probably another 2 to 4 inches.
Average day in Western New York.
And our phone rings. My office phone at the house rings. And it's a woman from a church that was near us. Because of the snow, her pastor wouldn't come and talk with her mother, who was dying in the hospital 10 miles away. So I remember she pleaded with me to come and talk to her mother. And I remember asking you, I just hit the mic in case you didn't hear that thump. I remember asking you for permission to leave your birthday party so that I could talk to that woman. And you gave it to me. I was grateful for that. What's awesome is I went and shared Christ with that older woman, and she accepted Christ as her Savior on her deathbed because she died about 2 hours later.
Wow.
But it's important to ask permission.
Yeah.
It's important to have those things on the calendar and just protect them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And some of you are not the most organized of people. I think, I joke that, the iPhone saved my life because, it has a calendar feature that's really handy, and it has a reminder feature that's even more handy. And I've just learned to use those tools, and they're the most important tools in my ministry. But you got to find those things, those little tools and those helps. There are so many out there that are available, and schedule those and work out your calendars and make sure that you're on the same page with your family and start there. That's something I sit down with my wife and do every year before we start planning, because I do a lot of events at the church, and so before I plan any of those events, they have to fit my family calendar first. And then we start planning where they fit in the church calendar after that. So, yeah, really key and important pieces of information. So, with the remaining time we have on this topic, where can a church? Where do you think a church can help its pastor in this area of making sure that their pastor does a great job of caring for their family and caring for their own personal health? I feel like in my ministry, Marsh Corner here has done better at this than any other church I've been a part of. But what are some things that a church can do to really help this?
So I think number one is remember that your pastor has a day off, and it's not Sunday. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, there are some things that I do, for example, on Sunday, just because it's Sunday. For example, I will not carry my mobile phone on Sundays. I'm an old-fashioned Sabbatarian. I grew up in a household where our television was not allowed on Sundays until after 5 o'clock. And that entire day was dedicated to church. So I'm coming from an old line of Sabbath keepers. So my phone actually stays plugged in and on the desk all day on Sunday. And then I'll answer phone calls after 5 o'clock. But I also take a day off during the week. And during my day off, I don't answer phone calls. Mm-hmm. You will go to my voicemail, and I check my voicemail twice on Fridays, which is my day off, just to see if there's anything that I need to address that day.
Yeah.
But it's good to remind yourself your pastor has that day off. So one of the things that you do with that is that might be the day that some of that responsibility might devolve onto elders or deacons in your church. Mm-hmm. Like if somebody calls in on a Friday and they've gone to the emergency room, 9 times out of 10, if you've gone to the emergency room or you're in the hospital on a Friday, I will
still be there.
I will pull myself out of my garden and quickly wash the dirt and grime off of my hands, and I will be there as soon as I can.
Yeah.
But it's also there's also an element there where have an elder or have a deacon who is on call for Fridays, and just say, if a call comes into the church on Friday, you're taking this, and it's a great way of helping your pastor out. Recognize that the burden of shouldering all of this life it's for all of us. And you know what? Here's another thing. Pastors, for your flock's sake, make sure you don't schedule every Saturday for a church event. Right? Because if we as pastors need time off from church, guess what? You do too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here's awful, and this is I'm going to have to chase somebody down on this one. You don't have to be at every church event.
Yeah.
If and immediately I'm going to get somebody who is going to be missing from church for a month, and
I don't have to be at every church event. You said it.
Yeah, no, you don't have to be. I mean,
You need to be consistent.
You can be consistent,
Yeah.
right? You should be consistent. You shouldn't throw your spiritual life into a tizzy and into a mess. But you don't have to be here every time the doors open.
Yeah, agreed.
You have to set up your own family schedule. Now, if your schedule is heavy toward your personal golf events or tennis events,
Right.
and you're telling me that you're spending time with your kids when really what you're doing is you're spending time with your buddies. That's not
Right. There should be some adjustment there.
right.
Priority.
Right.
Yeah.
But hey, if all of us within the Church of Jesus Christ sat down with our calendar every year and said, okay, where are the events that are unmovable in our family schedule? And where are the events that are part of our church's schedule? Then, and you plug those in around the 9 to 5 that you have, then you're going to be focusing your attention on your family, focusing your attention on your church, and focusing your attention on your work life in a balanced way.
Yeah. Yep. And this is good advice for anybody.
For anybody.
Not just people in ministry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think another area of help where as a church you can help your pastor out is to be careful about what you require of the pastor's family.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times a church looks at the pastor's wife as like, the 2-for-1 deal because they're married. She should be able to lead a Bible study and play the piano on the platform and run the women's ministry and also the homeless shelter and take care of the kids in the nursery. And, we start creating these lists of things that the pastor's wife should also be capable of doing. And there are a lot of amazing women out there who can do all of those things and more and love it and are built for it. And that's part of their ministry. But not every pastor's wife is.
And it's an interesting story because my wife is not.
Yeah.
So fun thing, you realize within the concept of being a helpmeet, many of the same skills that my wife has, I shouldn't have, or we need to make up for each other.
Mm-hmm.
So funny thing is that my wife absolutely hates being in front of people.
Same.
Oh, absolutely hates it, and she's never actually taught. I don't think she's actually ever taught a Bible study. She loves the Lord. She can ask really great Bible questions, right? And she understands Scripture, which is awesome, but she's not a public speaker.
Mm-hmm.
So she's not going to stand up in front of people or run a host group or anything like that. It's just not her style. So it's my style. I mean, I love a group. I would just love to be in. Yeah. So, but here's odd. I don't do well in one-on-one circumstances. I'm very, I don't necessarily ask the right questions. I don't do the small talk thing. There are times when I will be at a party or an event, and I have found myself just kind of standing in the middle of the room, all by myself, and saying, "What do I do?" Right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So on the opposite side, my wife, who can't do a public speaking thing ever, she'll come to church and she will float through the church building and she will talk to just about everybody. And then we'll get home after dinner or after church and she'll say, "So who did you talk to today?" And I'll rack my brain to try and figure out
everybody
who I
at
talked to,
once
right?
while I stood on the platform.
Yes. Yeah. But then she'll tell me that she had a conversation with so-and-so and that this is a problem and that she prayed with them or she talked with them about it and she talked with so-and-so and she talked with this person and that person. And I'm like, why is she asking me who I talked to? Because she's already talked to them all.
Yeah.
But that's her gift. That's her comfort level. It's her personality. And she does what she does exceptionally well.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those things that a church can do to care for the family. Let let the pastor's family serve in their area of giftedness,
Yes.
just like he would require of anybody else who is a member of the church, that we
Right.
all serve in our areas of giftedness, that we have the opportunity to discover those and then work in them for the betterment of the entire congregation. You can't expect every pastor's wife to be like, your perception of what a pastor's wife should be. Let them
Plays the
serve.
piano.
Yeah, although she
runs
does.
Bible
Right?
study.
Your wife does, mine doesn't.
Yeah.
So, so allow that of them, and then so that's a big piece. And then the other one is allow for that family time.
Yes.
We were in our first church, and we had gone 10 straight days of being out together doing different church activities. Some of those were together, some of those were just me. So we had gone, we talk about, only 6 nights out, make sure no 7. And I was hitting 10, I was approaching 14 and rapidly. And we had just realized, hey, this has not been good. We haven't seen each other in a couple of weeks. We're exhausted. And we need to just take some time together. And so there was an event that easily was handled by my youth ministry team that didn't need me at it. And so I equipped the team, prepared the students that we weren't going to be there. Everybody was on the same page. We said, we sent them off to the dinner that they all went together to hang out at. And Kim and I went home. And on the drive home, we are about to turn on the street where our townhouse was, and I get a phone call from from somebody from the senior pastor, telling us that we weren't doing our job and you needed to head right back right now to go and be at that event. Mm. And that was the night we both realized that wasn't the right ministry for us to be in, and we began the process of looking for another place to serve. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Because you just knew at that point that we weren't going to be cared for or taken care of, and we were just going to be worked. And we just saw that as a trajectory that was not going to be healthy for our family.
Right.
And we just knew at that point that this was the wrong place for us to be in. And it's sad that story is in our repertoire, but it was really formational for us from a very early point that we needed to be careful about how we managed our time.
Yeah.
That
right.
when that we were careful that when the time belonged to the church, that I labored intensely for the church. And when the time belonged to me, I needed to labor intensely to make sure that time did its job and served my health. And then when the time belonged to my family, we needed to labor intensely to make sure that the family benefited from that time. And one of the things that I think you can learn as a young pastor, and one of the things that a church can learn in a way to care for its pastors, is to make sure that their time is managed well in all of those areas.
Right. And if you're a senior pastor out there, remember your job, part of your job is to shepherd your staff. And if you find your staff is overcommitted, it's time for you as the senior pastor to step in and cut their schedule, which is crazy. I realize that's, but that's part of what we do as senior pastors, is making sure you say, hey, you have to cut something out here because you're not spending enough time with your family. If you're the head of your elder team, if you're the head of your deacon team, and you're in a church with a solo pastor, it is your responsibility as the head of that lay team to make sure that your pastor is taking his day off, to make sure that he isn't working 10 days in a row. Look, that happens.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I think everyone in ministry is okay with that happening occasionally.
Occasionally, yes, yeah. It's when it's not that. If you want, see, here's the deal: you want to have your pastor. You want to have one guy. I'm talking to you, churches of 60 and 75. You want to have one guy in your pulpit for a minimum of 5 years, and you really want him there for 10 to 15 years because that's when you really can hit and grow and actually accomplish something. One of the things that churches of 50 to 75 are notorious for doing is running through their pastors in, say, 3 years, 4 years, when he hasn't even had an opportunity to get started, and that's why you're a church of 50 to 75. He just hasn't been able to get going because you've burned him out.
He's only used 3 silver bullets.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this whole idea of balancing your life and, balancing your physical life with your spiritual life, with your work life, it's really important. It's like being able to swim and run and bicycle.
Yeah.
And do them all well.
I was 6 or 7 years ago, so well before I started in this process, I was meeting with a friend, another pastoral friend, and a famous author. We were hanging out down in Boston, chatting, and the author was talking about his newfound love for ultra running, which at the time was the most insane thing I had ever heard of. And now, still crazy, but I get it. But he was talking about like an 80-mile run he had done. And he said that the run had taken place in a park and all around a loop that was like 1.5 miles long. And I'm not a runner at this point. And I said, what? Like, it's the same loop over and over and over again? Like, doesn't that get boring? And he said, if you're into ultra running for the scenery, then you're not in then you're not going to last in ultra running. And like the thing that hit me later, he was talking about how to succeed and how to finish one of these massive events. And his statement was the only way to actually cross the finish line in one of these ultra running events is when your body and your brain and your spiritual life are all on the same page working together. If one of those is off, you're not going to finish. Mm-hmm. And pastors, you need the same thing. If your body and your brain and your spiritual life aren't on the same page, and if your family life is not on the same page, your church is going to suffer, and you're not going to finish this very long endurance race of pastoral ministry. Most men who start off in pastoral ministry are no longer in pastoral ministry after a decade.
Yeah.
It's a hard calling, and the way to last in this wonderful but very difficult calling is to make sure that you're minding your time well.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we didn't talk about the topic we had on our list at all today.
No, we'll have to come around to that one, huh?
Yeah, but that's, it's the way it goes when you're in the pastor's study. That we can get, we just get running on
another idea. Yeah. Well, join us next time. Maybe we'll hit it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hit the other topic. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.
Bye now.
You've been listening to Inside the Pastor's Study podcast, hosted by Pastors George and Jeremy Stevens. Cover art by Caitlin Gallagher. Music by Sammy Kay. To find out more about us, head to marshcorner.com.